I am Leela Carter, 39 years old. To the prestigious Carter family, however, I am the disappointment dressed in a uniform, a persistent source of embarrassment. When my mother called about my sister's promotion party, her voice was like cold steel slicing through the phone. Use the back door. Don't disgrace her. It was a blunt order for the daughter they believe simply shuffles papers in Langley. What they don't realize is that their so-called paper pusher has just returned from a nightmarish mission, bringing 31 souls back home with her. That familiar icy shard lodged itself in my chest as I drove, but the most crushing blow came when I stepped into the kitchen, and my mother didn't even glance at me. Her eyes slid past my shoulder as if I were an invisible coat rack. "Good, you're here," she said flatly, the air seeming to vanish from my lungs. I slipped on the smile I'd perfected over 20 years, a flawless mask to conceal the scream within. Have you ever had to wear a mask like that just to survive your own family? Share your story in the comments below, because that night marked the start of mine. The autumn leaves of Toke, Maryland, wove a tapestry of golden hues and fiery reds, but I was too lost in my thoughts to notice. My hands clenched the worn steering wheel of my old Honda Accord, a familiar ache tightening my chest. The memory of my mother's call from a few days ago played on an endless loop, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "Olivia has a major party this Saturday," she stated, not a request. "You should be there, and Leela, don't wear those practical clothes. They're unsuitable. Please, for goodness sake, don't bring up your little adventures. You mustn't embarrass her. Oh, and use the kitchen entrance. The front is for prominent guests." Each word felt like a sliver of glass working its way into my heart, though I told myself I was used to it. The Carter family saw me as a quiet failure, unaware that I had just led a secret operation, saving 31 lives. I followed her instructions, parking my car in a secluded spot near the overflowing recycling bins. The damp smell of leaves blended with the sour odor of last night's catering as I entered through the service door into the busy kitchen. A caterer I'd never met before paused his chopping, giving me a curious look, as if I were a new dishwasher. My mother, Margaret, stood like a statue in a navy scent, John dress, her posture impeccable. Her eyes flicked over me, a brief flash of disapproval crossing her face before it went blank. "Good, you're here," she said, her tone confirming my status as a task completed. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward a table stacked with gifts. "Put your present for Olivia there, and don't disturb her before her speech." There was no question about my 10-hour drive, no hug. Just her turning away to adjust a tray of lobster puffs with meticulous care. I waded through the glittering crowd, feeling utterly out of place in my simple slacks and blouse amid the champagne-soaked conversations. My father, William, was deep in discussion with a senator, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear, and offered me a brisk nod, a political acknowledgement, not a fatherly one. Then Olivia appeared, a vision in a silk gown, gliding through the room like a queen in her court. She spotted me and made a grand display of it. "Oh, there you are," she called out, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to turn. She draped an arm around my shoulders, her touch feeling more like a restraint. "Everyone," she announced with a sugary, condescending smile, "this is my sister, Leela. She works for the government, some desk job in Langley, I think." A few polite, well-bred chuckles rippled through the air, cutting deeper than any outright insult. I felt a hot flush rise to my face, but I held my smile, a stiff, fragile thing I'd worn for 2 decades. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of champagne-fueled chatter, the truth hit me hard. In their world, I wasn't just invisible. I was an embarrassment to be managed. They didn't know that what they saw as my failure was the very shield protecting their lavish parties. The muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses followed me as I slipped through the French doors onto the back terrace. The chilly autumn air was a welcome shock, a clean blade slicing through the suffocating perfume and pretense inside. I leaned against the cold stone balustrade, my breath fogging in the dim light, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. That was when I saw it. My throat closed instantly. Propping open one of the heavy doors was a folded American flag. Not just any flag, but the one that had draped the casket of my teammate James after he fell beside me in Damascus. With no home to call my own, no mantelpiece to honor it, I had entrusted it to Margaret for safekeeping, a sacred trust. Now its crisp ceremonial folds were collecting dust on the flagstone, one corner already beginning to fray against the rough surface. To them, a symbol of ultimate sacrifice was nothing more than a convenient household object. Slowly, with reverence, I knelt and picked it up, brushing the dust from the stars with the palm of my hand. The wool fabric felt both heavy and hollow, like holding a ghost. This quiet, thoughtless desecration hurt more than any of their barbed words. Leaving the chatter of the party behind, I sought refuge in my father's library. The room was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, a mausoleum dedicated to the approved successes of the Carter lineage. The walls were a gallery of achievement, Olivia shaking hands with a governor, my brother in his dress uniform receiving a commendation, diplomas from Yale and Georgetown, awards, promotions, and wedding photos all displayed in heavy ornate frames. I scanned the wall, searching for a trace of myself. I knew there was only one picture that included me, a family portrait from when I was 20. I found the frame, but I wasn't in it. Where my younger self should have stood awkwardly next to Olivia, there was now just a sliver of the manicured lawn behind us. I ran my finger along the edge of the photograph inside the glass. The cut was clumsy, a jagged line where I had been surgically removed. My Aunt Patricia's voice echoed in my memory from a holiday years ago, a piece of harmless family gossip now tinged with irony. "Oh, Margaret got a new, smaller frame, and you just didn't fit, dear," she'd said with a shrug. She had to crop you out to balance the composition. Balance the composition, I wasn't a daughter, I was a disruptive element in their perfect picture. Staring at that empty space, that void where I was supposed to be, I felt the truth of it sink into my bones. I had been excised from their narrative long before I ever left home. That blank space in the frame pulled me back further down the rabbit hole of memory to the day the excision began 19 years ago. I was standing in this very same room, the air thick with the scent of lemon polish and my father's disappointment. I hadn't dropped out of the FBI Academy. I had been handpicked, recruited by a quiet man in a nondescript gray suit, who met me on the grounds of Quantico and spoke of a clandestine program that didn't officially exist, a program that required me to vanish. When I tried to explain it to my parents, there was no pride, only a chilling silence. My father, William, stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of stern disapproval. He finally spoke, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his verdict. "So, you're quitting," he said. "It wasn't a question. What are we supposed to tell people? That William Carter's daughter couldn't handle the pressure?" He looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just brought shame upon his house. "You've turned this family's legacy into an embarrassment." My mother's reaction was quieter and somehow far worse. She sat in her favorite armchair, and her only movement was the delicate, almost silent clink of her porcelain teacup returning to its saucer. She looked at me not with anger, but with a kind of resigned pity that was infinitely more crushing. "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, Leela," she said, her voice soft, gentle, and utterly devastating. That single sentence had become the soundtrack of my life, a quiet, constant reminder of the failure they had assigned to me. I pulled myself back to the present, standing alone in the silent library. I was still holding James's flag, clutching it to my chest. They celebrated success with framed photographs and plaques on the wall. They built a shrine to the polished public, facing symbols of honor. They praised the medals, I thought, but they are terrified of the scars that earned them. The scars they couldn't see were the ones that defined me. My life was a collection of moments they would never understand, lived in stark, silent contrast to their world of polished silver and political handshakes. The memory that surfaced most often was from a Christmas 3 years ago. While my family was gathered around a roaring fireplace in their Maryland mansion, the scent of roasting turkey and pine filling the air, I was a world away. I was sitting on a cold concrete floor in a derelict safe house in Kabul, Afghanistan. My Christmas dinner was a chalky protein bar and a bottle of lukewarm water. Outside, the distant sporadic pop of gunfire was the only carol I heard. My eyes were glued to a grainy monitor tracking the movements of a hive. Al, you target. I couldn't move, couldn't sleep, couldn't look away for a second. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I pulled out my satellite phone and opened Instagram. Olivia had just posted a photo. The whole family was there, beaming, raising glasses of red wine. My father had his arm around her. The caption read, "Family is everything, just wishing everyone was here with us tonight." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. I was the everyone who wasn't there. I was the ghost in their machine, the unseen cog ensuring they could post their hollow, sentimental captions in blissful peace. I snapped the phone shut. The ensuing silence in that dusty room was absolute, and the loneliness was a physical presence, colder and more piercing than the Afghan winter night. That loneliness was a constant companion, but it was sharpest in the aftermath of a mission. It became a living thing after Operation Starlight. The memories of that op didn't come back softly. They came in flashes of fire and chaos. It was a hostage rescue in a fortified compound in Libya. The plan went sideways the moment we hit the ground. Intel was bad. The target building was rigged. I had a split second to make a call. Follow the exfiltration plan and save the primary hostage or divert, and risk everything for a group of civilians, 3 children among them, who were about to be caught in the crossfire of the local militia. The manual, the training, my orders, they all screamed for me to stick to the primary objective. I made a different call. We got the children out. We got all the civilians out, but the delay cost us. It cost us James and it cost us Paul. I came back to base with 3rd-degree burns on my forearms and a hole in my heart that would never fully close. There was no medal ceremony, no press conference, just a classified after-action report that would be buried in a vault and the recurring nightmares that became my new bedfellows. A few weeks later, when I finally felt steady enough to call home, I got my father on the line. I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask where I was. His first and only question was, "Are you still doing that nameless job of yours? When are you going to get a real career, Leela?" I clicked the phone off, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The chasm between my reality and their perception of it was too vast to ever be bridged. Back in the present, I stood in the sterile silence of a cheap motel room off the interstate, the kind with thin walls and bolted-down furniture. The faint smell of bleach hung in the air. I winced as I peeled the old dressing off a wound on my shoulder. It was a souvenir from a close quarters fight in a crowded Istanbul bazaar. A long, ugly gash from a knife that had gotten too close. The stitches had come out, but it had flared up again, angry and red. With the practiced efficiency of a field medic, I cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe from my go bag, applied a fresh layer of ointment, and skillfully wrapped it in a clean bandage. I did it all without a mirror, by feel alone. My hands were steady, my movements sure. This was my life stripped bare, a solitary existence of patching up my own wounds, both the visible and the invisible, in the quiet anonymity of rented rooms. I didn't need their pity. I didn't even want their understanding anymore. But as I caught my reflection in the dim bathroom mirror, I saw the profound exhaustion in my eyes. I saw the fine lines etched there not by age, but by too many sunrises seen from the wrong side of the world. And a deep, aching wish surfaced, a desire so fierce it startled me. I just wished for once they could see me, not the failure, not the dropout, but the survivor. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass, and whispered to the tired face staring back, "You're still here, Leela, and that's enough." But was it? Sometimes in the dead of night, I wonder if there is anyone on this earth who can look at me and not see my family's shadow looming behind. I didn't go back to the motel. The thought of those 4 beige walls felt more suffocating than ever. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets of D.C., the wounds of the evening still raw and bleeding. On impulse, I found myself in Georgetown, pulling up outside the Tombs, A classic subterranean bar with brick walls and low wood, beamed ceilings, the kind of place no one in my family, with their preference for sterile, high-end hotel lounges, would ever set foot in. I slid onto a worn wooden stool at the far end of the bar. The scent of old beer and oak was a strangely comforting blanket. I ordered a bourbon neat, needing the burn to chase away the chill in my soul. I was staring into the amber liquid, swirling it in my glass, when a deep, familiar voice rumbled beside me. "Leela Carter, I'll be damned. I don't believe my eyes." I looked up and my breath caught. It was Thomas Ward, my old instructor from the farm, the CA training grounds in the Virginia countryside. He looked older now, his dark hair turned a distinguished silver, but his eyes were the same, crinkled at the corners with a deep, knowing warmth. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be retired, fishing on some lake in Montana. He pulled up the stool next to me, signaling the bartender for a beer. He didn't ask about my family, didn't offer empty platitudes about the party I'd obviously just fled. He looked me in the eye, a real appraising look. "That situation in Tripoli last year," he said, his voice low and serious. "I heard you handled that with a cool head. Damn good work." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It was the first time in years, decades maybe, that someone had spoken to me about my work, not as a nameless job or a little adventure, but with the quiet, profound respect of a fellow professional. A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away some of the ice. "I just did my job, Thomas," I managed to say. He grunted, taking a long sip of his beer. "Don't sell yourself short, kid. Never do that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. "You look like you could use a real meal. My place is just a few blocks from here. I make a mean chili." I hesitated for only a second before nodding. Anything was better than returning to the crushing loneliness of my motel room. His apartment was small but clean, a bachelor pad filled with books and old maps. The air smelled of coffee and wood polish. "My wife Helen passed last year," he said softly, as if sensing my unspoken question. He moved around the small kitchen with an easy, practiced grace. "It's nice to have someone to cook for once in a while." He handed me a steaming bowl of thick, dark chili and a slice of skillet, fried cornbread, golden and crisp at the edges. We sat at his small kitchen table, under the warm glow of a single hanging lamp. We didn't talk about my family. We talked about the life we knew, about old campaigns and fallen comrades. I found myself telling him about Operation Starlight, the words tumbling out of me, recounting the impossible choice, the fire, the loss of James and Paul. I told him everything I had locked away, everything I had carried alone for so long. He just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't judge. He just let me speak until the story was finished, until the silence settled back into the room, heavy but no longer painful. When I was done, he simply nodded, his gaze steady and kind. "You made the right call, kid," he said, his voice firm. "Compassion isn't a weakness in our line of work. It's the whole damn point. It's the strongest weapon we've got." And just like that, the dam I had so carefully constructed inside me for 20 years finally broke. A tear slid down my cheek, then another. Hot, silent tears of grief and gratitude, and a relief so profound it was dizzying. Thomas didn't say a word. He just slid a box of tissues across the table toward me and let me cry. When I was finally ready to leave, my shoulders feeling lighter than they had in years, Thomas stopped me at the door. He pressed a small, heavy object into my hand. It was a small antique brass compass, its glass face scratched, and its edges worn smooth with time. "It saw me through 3 wars, he said, closing my fingers around it. "It's yours now, so you can always find your way home." He paused, and his eyes met mine with an intensity that anchored me. "And remember this, Leela, home isn't the place you were born. It's the place where they're waiting for you." His words were a balm, a healing salve on a wound I didn't even know was still open. For the first time, I felt like I had a place to belong, a family not of blood, but of spirit. I was no longer a lone ship in the storm. Someone was holding a light for me. As I turned to go, he added one last thing, his voice a low, cautionary note. "Be careful, Leela. The people who are used to you living in their shadow won't like it when you start to shine. For a week, I lived on the quiet warmth that Thomas had given me. I carried the weight of his compass in my pocket, a constant, solid reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. For the first time in a long time, a fragile sense of hope began to take root in the barren soil of my heart. Maybe things could be different. Maybe I could be different. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read William Carter. My father never called me. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down and answered. "Leila," he began, his voice infused with a practiced artificial warmth I knew all too well from his years in politics. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. What's wrong?" I asked, cutting through the pretense. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Always straight to the point, aren't you? Listen, I was just calling to chat. Heard from a friend of mine that you know Senator Peterson quite well. Had a drink with him last year at that fundraiser, didn't you?" The knot in my stomach turned to ice. I had provided security oversight for Peterson's diplomatic trip to the Middle East. We weren't friends. We had a professional relationship built on mutual respect. "I know him," I said carefully. "Wonderful, wonderful." He boomed. "Well, as it happens, he's the swing vote on the Appropriations Committee for a new counterterrorism funding project, a project Olivia is heading up. It would be a huge step for her career." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I was just thinking if you had a moment, you could put in a good word, you know, for the family." For the family, the three words they always used to disguise a demand. There was no inquiry about my life, no mention of the party, no curiosity about my well-being. I was simply a tool to be used, a contact in his Rolodex to be leveraged for Olivia's advancement, my skills, my network, my entire dangerous hidden life. It was all invisible until the moment it could serve their ambition. "I'll see what I can do." I lied, my voice flat. "That's my girl," he said, the false warmth returning, and then he hung up. The next day my mother called. Her approach was different, more refined, but no less predatory. She invited me to lunch at the Hay Adams, a place overlooking the White House, known for its power lunches and exorbitant prices, a place she knew I detested. I met her there, feeling out of place in my simple slacks and blouse, amidst the sea of dark power suits and Chanel ensembles. Margaret was in her element, perfectly coiffed, wearing a cream-colored Chanel blazer that probably cost more than my car. For 20 minutes, she spoke of meaningless things: her upcoming trip to Tuscany, a charity gala, the brilliance of Olivia's recent work. She stirred her iced tea with a long silver spoon, the picture of detached elegance. Then she laid her trap. "Leila, dear," she began, setting her spoon down with a soft click. "Your father told me he spoke with you. It's so important that you help your sister with this. You owe it to this family." A humorless laugh almost escaped me. "Owe you?" I said, keeping my voice low and even. "After everything, you think I owe you something." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. It was like watching a pleasant day freeze over in an instant. "I think you owe us your loyalty. We gave you everything, a good name and education, opportunities you chose to throw away." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You've always been selfish, Leila, only thinking of yourself and your strange, secretive life. It's no wonder you never got anywhere. Olivia, on the other hand, understands duty." "Mom," I said, my patience gone. "I don't owe anyone anything." The final and most direct assault came that evening. There was a sharp knock on my motel room door. I opened it to find Olivia holding a bottle of expensive Cabernet and smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Big sister," she purred, brushing past me into the small room. "I know you're mad, but I came to make peace." She set the wine down on the cheap laminate desk. "I just wanted you to know I appreciate you considering helping me." "I'm not helping you, Olivia," I said, closing the door. Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Don't be like that. Think of it as a trade. You help me, and I can help you." She looked around the drab room with theatrical pity. "I have connections now. I could talk to some people at the bureau, find a more suitable position for you. Something real, a desk, a pension, proper benefits. It's the least I can do." It wasn't an offer. It was the ultimate insult, a bribe wrapped in condescension. She was offering to rescue me from the very life of sacrifice and significance that she was incapable of understanding, dangling the success she had been handed as a prize for my compliance. I looked straight at her, my anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. I don't need you to find me a job, Olivia, and I am not going to use the relationships I've bled for to advance your career. The false smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Her face hardened. "Fine," she hissed, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Be that place." She grabbed her purse, leaving the wine on the desk like a piece of abandoned evidence. At the door, she paused and looked back at me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Then don't blame me," she said. She had just declared war, and she had no idea who she was picking a fight with. Olivia's threat, "don't blame me," hung in the stale air of my motel room long after she'd gone. It was a promise. I just didn't know how quickly she intended to keep it. A few days later, I was back at the Tombs sharing a quiet beer with Thomas. It was the only place in the city that felt like a sanctuary. My phone, sitting face down on the dark wood of the bar, suddenly began to vibrate incessantly. Not a single call, but a cascade of text messages, one after another, from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked its way up my spine. I picked up the phone. The first message was a link from a former analyst. No text, just the link. I tapped it. My blood ran cold. It was an article on a prominent, aggressively right-leaning political blog, the kind that specialized in DC insider scandals. The headline was a loaded question: Operation Starlight, CA heroism or reckless endangerment. My hands started to shake as I read. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and character assassination. It painted a picture of a rogue agent, Meade, driven by ego, who ignored protocol and directly caused the deaths of 2 American operatives just to save a few unnamed foreign nationals. It hinted at a massive cover-up by the agency to avoid embarrassment, but it was the sourcing that stopped my heart. The entire narrative, the article claimed, was based on information from a source close to the Carter family, who has long been concerned about the agent's instability. A source close to the Carter family, Olivia. She hadn't just threatened me. She had taken the most sacred, painful moment of my professional life, the mission that cost me James and Paul, and twisted it into a weapon. She was desecrating their memory, painting their sacrifice as a consequence of my supposed incompetence. This wasn't just about undermining my career anymore. This was a violation. This was a desecration. The years of quiet dismissals of being treated like a ghost were nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal of the dead, a white-hot rage, pure and more potent than any I had ever felt, burned away every last shred of my carefully constructed composure. I threw a few bills on the bar, muttered a clipped "I have to go" to a bewildered Thomas, and stormed out into the night. I didn't think I just drove. The 10-mile drive to Olivia's chic Georgetown condo felt like a 100-mile high-speed chase. I found a parking spot, abandoned my car, and buzzed her apartment. When the door clicked open, I pushed my way into the lobby and took the elevator up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't knock. I shoved her apartment door open. The sound of light, jazz and laughter spilled out. Olivia was in the living room holding a glass of white wine, surrounded by a small group of her fashionable, ambitious friends. They all turned to stare at me as I stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Olivia's face paled when she saw the look in my eyes. I didn't say a word. I just walked across her expensive Persian rug, held up my phone with the article displayed on the screen, and shoved it in her face. Silence descended upon the room. The jazz music suddenly sounded loud and obscene. And then one of Olivia's friends, a vapid woman with a perfect blowout, giggled nervously and said the words that sealed my sister's fate. "Oh my God, Olivia, you actually did it. I told you leaking that story would work." The admission hung in the air, naked and ugly. I saw the flash of fury in Olivia's eyes, not at me, but at her friend's stupidity. The truth was out. She had intentionally, maliciously used the deaths of my colleagues as a pawn in her petty game of sibling rivalry, a calculated move to prove her own superiority. I finally found my voice. It wasn't a shout. It was something far colder, far more dangerous. "You didn't just betray me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "You betrayed the memory of Men who died so you could stand here in your safe little world drinking Sauvignon Blanc. I looked at each of her friends, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. Then my eyes locked back on Olivia. I watched as every ounce of color drained from her face. I turned and walked out without another word. As I strode back to my car, the rage that had been a burning inferno inside me began to cool, crystallizing into something hard and clear, a diamond of pure, unadulterated resolve. The years of silence were over. I had let them define me, diminish me, and now desecrate the very core of who I am no more. I got into my car, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. I pulled out my secure encrypted phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It was answered on the second ring. Director Carter's office. "This is Leela Carter," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need a meeting with the director immediately, and I need a keynote speaking slot at the upcoming National Security Conference." I paused, my next words forming the declaration of my own war. "The topic will be lessons from nameless operations." The game had changed. They wanted a public fight. I was about to give them one. There comes a moment when you've been pushed too far. A moment when keeping silent is no longer an option. It's the moment you decide to fight back. If you know that feeling, if you've ever reached that breaking point, leave a single fire emoji in the comments. It's time to turn up the heat. The white, hot rage that had propelled me from the tombs had served its purpose. Now it was gone, replaced by something far more useful. A cold, clear, and absolute focus. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind the calm, focused mind of a field operative preparing for a mission. This was a different kind of battlefield, but the principles were the same. Know your objective, know your enemy, and assemble your weapons. The next morning, I was at Langley sitting across a sterile conference table from Director David Carter. The room was a SIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, soundproof and windowless, a place where secrets were currency. I didn't waste his time with family drama or emotional appeals. I laid it out for him like an intelligence briefing, a targeted leak of classified operational details, a clear breach of national security originating from a domestic source, and the potential for significant damage to agency morale and credibility. I then presented my solution, not an internal investigation that would be buried, but a public correction of narrative, a keynote address at the upcoming National Security Conference. Carter, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper silences, listened without interruption. He steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into me, searching for any hint of emotional instability, of personal vendetta. He found none. He found only a senior officer presenting a strategic response to a threat. He was silent for a full minute, a minute that stretched into an eternity. Then he gave a single decisive nod. "You have 20 minutes on the main stage, Carter," he said, his voice flat. "Don't make me regret this." It wasn't just permission, it was a validation. In that sterile, silent room, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency had given me his trust. He knew exactly what I was doing. The days that followed were a blur of methodical work. I was given access to a secure data center deep in the bowels of the agency headquarters, a cold, humming room filled with servers that held the unvarnished truth. This wasn't about revenge, it was about evidence. I wasn't building a case against my sister. I was building a fortress of facts. I pulled the full unredacted after-action report from Operation Starlight. I retrieved the encrypted audio logs from the mission, the frantic calls, the calm orders, the final heartbreaking sigh. Noffs from James and Paul. I accessed the declassified satellite imagery and the sworn debriefs from the surviving team members. Then came the hardest part, citing a clear national security imperative based on the leak. I filed a formal request for logs of all external communications from my sister's government-issued devices for the past month. The request was approved. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. A clear digital trail of encrypted emails and text messages between Olivia and the political blogger. She hadn't just spoken to him. She had fed him a carefully curated, twisted version of the events, complete with operational details that only an insider could know. My weapons weren't going to be emotion or accusations. They were going to be time-stamped, undeniable facts. The night before the conference, I stood in my quiet motel room, the entire presentation loaded onto a single encrypted flash drive. My battlefield wardrobe was laid out on the bed. I hadn't chosen a power suit or an elegant dress. There would be no performance, only a presentation of truth, I had selected a simple charcoal gray silk blouse, a pair of tailored black trousers, and flat, practical leather shoes. It was the uniform of a professional, an analyst, an expert. It didn't scream, "Look at me." It whispered, "Listen to me." As a final touch, I picked up a small, discreet pin from my jewelry case, the insignia of my old Special Activities Division unit. It was small enough to be almost unnoticeable to the uninitiated, but to the few in the audience who knew, it would speak volumes. It was a quiet signal of authenticity. I stood before the mirror not to check my appearance but to check my resolve. The reflection that stared back wasn't Leela, the hurt daughter, the invisible sister. It was Carter, a senior intelligence officer. The anger was gone. The pain was compartmentalized. All that was left was a calm, steely readiness. I was prepared. The next morning, the air backstage at the conference hall was thick with nervous energy and the smell of stale coffee. I could hear the low murmur of 1,000 attendees finding their seats. My family, I knew, would be in the front row, a courtesy extended to the family of a keynote speaker. A courtesy that would soon feel like a curse. I heard the moderator on stage begin my introduction, a career of distinguished, if quiet, service. I stood in the darkness of the wings, the small, heavy weight of the flash drive in my pocket. My heart wasn't racing, my hands were steady. I felt familiar, focused calm that always settled over me just before an operation began. Please join me in welcoming Officer Leela Carter. The spotlight hit the stage. The applause began. This is the moment, I thought, that truth gets its voice back. The polite applause died down as I walked to the center of the stage. The heat of the spotlights felt like an interrogation lamp. But for the first time, I wasn't the one being interrogated. The auditorium was vast, a sea of expectant faces from every corner of the intelligence community. And there in the front row sat my family. It was a place of honor, a courtesy extended to the family of a keynote speaker. My father, William, looked proud in a detached political way. My mother, Margaret, was a picture of poised composure, and Olivia looked at me with a smirk of smug triumph. She thought she had won. She thought this was my public execution. I reached the lectern but didn't hide behind it. I took the wireless microphone, walked a few steps forward, and stood directly in the light. The large screen behind me remained blank. I didn't look at my family. I looked out at the audience, at the generals, the analysts, field agents, and the policymakers. "Good morning," I began, my voice calm and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "The program says my topic today is emerging asymmetric threats, but I'm not going to talk about strategy. I'm going to tell you a story. It's about the true cost of intelligence. It's about the price of truth." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the dry academic presentation they were expecting. I saw Director Carter sitting in the second row give a nearly imperceptible nod. "It's about a mission called Operation Starlight," I continued. I proceeded to walk them through it, not with charts and graphs, but with the visceral reality of the events. I spoke of the bad intel, the compromised safe house, the smell of dust and cordite. I spoke of the faces of the terrified civilians we found huddled in a basement. I spoke of James and Paul not as statistics but as men. I described James's stupid jokes that kept us sane during long surveillance shifts and Paul's habit of always saving a piece of chocolate from his rations for the local kids. I made them real. I made the audience feel the weight of the impossible choice I faced in that moment of chaos. The entire hall was silent, captivated. Then I shifted my tone. The storyteller became the analyst. "Recently," I said, my voice becoming sharper, more clinical, "it has been suggested in certain public forums that this operation was in fact a reckless failure. It has been alleged that lives were lost due to an officer's ego, and that the events were subsequently covered up by the agency." I let the accusation hang in the air for a beat. Then, for the first time, I allowed my gaze to drift to the front row, right into Olivia's eyes. "This narrative," I said, my voice dropping but carrying a new weight, "was unfortunately propagated by sources who sought to weaponize sacrifice for personal gain." I saw Olivia stiffen. The smirk on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My father's brow furrowed. "Disinformation is a powerful weapon," I stated, turning my attention back to the audience. It rarely works as one big lie. It's most effective when it's built from thousands of twisted truths. As I said the words twisted truths, I clicked the remote in my hand. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. It wasn't a graph. It was a screenshot. A screenshot of an encrypted email from Olivia's government, tissued phone to the political blogger. The sender and receiver were clearly visible. I had redacted the blogger's name to maintain a professional high ground, but Olivia's was there for all to see. Key phrases in the email body were highlighted in red, phrases like reckless disregard for protocol, and more concerned with her image than her team. And the most damning one, a tragic but avoidable loss. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The silence was no longer captivated. It was electric with shock. I watched as my father's face went from confusion to disbelief, then to a horrified understanding. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her mask of composure shattering into a million pieces. But I kept my eyes on Olivia. I watched as every ounce of color drained from her face, her smug confidence replaced by the raw, ugly face of panic. She looked trapped, she looked exposed. I clicked the remote again, but I didn't come here today to talk about betrayal. I said, my voice softening slightly as the screen behind me went dark. I came here to honor the real heroes. The screen lit up again, this time with the official smiling portraits of Sergeant James Peterson and Officer Paul Chen. Their names appeared in bold letters beneath their faces. These were the men who gave their lives during Operation Starlight. I said, they did not die because of a reckless decision. They died because they made a courageous one. They died shielding the very civilians we were sent to save. I clicked the remote a final time. A short, grainy video began to play. It was a cell phone recording from one of the survivors, a message they had sent to the agency months later. A man with a tired face spoke in halting English, thanking the soldiers who came from the sky. Then the camera turned to his daughter, a little girl no older than 10. She looked directly into the lens, her dark eyes wide and serious. The lady with the sad eyes, she said, she saved us. She saved my brother. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. I took a deep breath and delivered my final volley. The value of an operative is not measured by the medals on their chest, but by the lives they save. The security of this nation is not built on ambition. It is built on compassion. It is built on the courage to make the hard choice, the right choice, no matter the personal cost. That is the true lesson of Operation Starlight. For a moment there was nothing, then a single person in the back began to clap, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The sound of their applause, a deafening, rolling wave of validation, washed over me. A sound I had never heard before. A sound I never knew I needed. I didn't look at the cheering crowd. My work with them was done. Instead, I looked directly at the front row. I saw the stunned horror on my father's face. I saw the shame warring with anger on my mother's. And in Olivia's eyes, I saw the complete and utter devastation of a world that had just crumbled to dust around her. The game was over. The board had been flipped. I had won. But as the applause roared in my ears, why did it feel so much like a loss? The applause from the conference hall had faded, but the silence that replaced it was even louder. In the hours that followed my speech, my phone was a constant buzz of messages from colleagues, from Director Carter, even from Thomas. But there was nothing from my family. They didn't call, they didn't text. They simply vanished, retreating behind a wall of wounded pride. That evening, I drove back to the house in Toke one last time. There were a few personal effects in my old room, a box of books, a photograph of a friend I'd lost, James's flag. I needed them. I needed to excise the last few remnants of my life from this place so I could finally be free of it. I let myself in with my key. The house was deathly quiet. I found them all in the grand living room, the one reserved for important guests. They were sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering, flameless candles on the mantelpiece. It felt like walking into a wake. Olivia was curled into a small ball on the sofa, her face puffy and stained with tears. My mother stared blankly at the cold hearth. My father stood by the window, a stiff silhouette against the darkening sky. He was the first to speak, his voice trembling with a rage that had been simmering all afternoon. "You've destroyed everything," he said, turning to face me. His face was a mask of fury. "Everything. This family's name, your sister's career, all of it burned to the ground because of your selfishness." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, only a profound, weary sadness. "No, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I didn't destroy anything. I just told the truth. This family's obsession with its own image, Mom's willful silence, and Olivia's ambition. That's what destroyed everything. The truth just turned on the lights." My mother finally stirred. She looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something other than disappointment in her eyes. It looked like fear. "Leela, I'm sorry," she whispered, the words sounding foreign and brittle on her tongue. I didn't know. I was only trying to protect Olivia." I shook my head slowly. "You weren't protecting her, Mom. You were enabling her. You taught her that ambition was more important than integrity." I took a breath, the words coming out calmly without the anger I expected to feel. "And that apology isn't for me. It's for you. It's to make yourself feel better now that the ugly truth is out in the open, but it's too late for that. I wasn't saying it to be cruel. I was saying it because it was a clinical fact. Forgiveness can't grow in soil that isn't tilled with genuine remorse. Theirs was a garden of regret for getting caught, not for the crime itself. I had to protect the small, fragile peace I had just won for myself." Finally, I walked over to the sofa where Olivia was hunched over, refusing to look at me. I stood before her for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, filled with the ghosts of 20 years of resentment. "I don't hate you, Olivia," I said, my voice softer now, but carrying an unmistakable weight of finality. "I just can't have you in my life anymore." Her shoulders shook with a silent sob. "You need to learn how to live with who you are. You need to find your own light instead of trying to extinguish everyone else's." I reached into my pocket and took out the key to the house. I placed it gently on the polished surface of the mahogany coffee table in front of her. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. "This is the last time I will be in this house," I said, speaking to all of them and to myself. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. My footsteps were loud, and even on the cold marble floor of the foyer. Each step was an affirmation. Each sound was the forging of a new boundary, solid and impenetrable. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. As I got into my car and pulled away from the curb, a wave of pure exhaustion washed over me. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I felt drained, I felt pained. But underneath it all, as the perfectly manicured lawns of Toke slid past my window for the last time, I felt something else. Freedom. For the first time, the road ahead was entirely my own, but it was also completely empty. The road, from that empty night in Toke, eventually led me here 6 months later. It led me to a small log cabin tucked away in the quiet rolling hills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. My nearest neighbor is a mile down a gravel road. The only sounds are the wind sighing through the tall pine trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The silence here isn't empty, it's full, it's peaceful. I didn't quit the agency, but I don't do field work anymore. My days of living out of a go bag and sleeping with one eye open are over. After the conference, Director Carter called me into his office. He didn't mention my family. He simply said my unique experience with complex human terrain made me the ideal candidate for a new role. I am now the head of strategic training for the next generation of case officers. I teach them not just tradecraft, but empathy. I teach them that the hardest choices they'll ever make won't be between right and wrong, but between the greater good and the letter of the law. I'm turning my scars into lessons. Thomas drives down from D.C. every few weekends. We sit on my wide wooden porch drinking cheap beer and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. We don't talk much, we don't have to. We just fish in the nearby creek and enjoy the easy comfort of a shared silence. This, I've realized, is a real home. It isn't built with brick and mortar. and defined by the suffocating weight of expectation. It's built with peace. It's defined by acceptance. Thomas was right. I finally found my way home. One crisp afternoon, as I was sorting through the mail on my porch, I found a letter. It was a simple, plain white envelope with no return address. But I recognized the elegant, sharp slant of the handwriting instantly. It was from Olivia. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside there was no long, tearful apology. There were no excuses. There was only a single photocopied page, an official notice of transfer. Olivia had voluntarily requested a reassignment from her high-profile position in D.C. to a small, quiet field office in the Midwest. She was leaving the center of power, leaving the game she had tried so hard to win. Tucked at the bottom of the page, there was a short handwritten note. It said, "I'm learning to find my own light. Thank you for showing me the dark." I folded the letter and put it away. There was no triumphant surge of victory, no feeling of vindication. There was only a quiet, gentle sadness and a flicker of hope for the sister I once knew. My legacy, I realized, wasn't the destruction of her career. Perhaps in some small way, it was the catalyst for her to finally start building a life that was truly her own. This morning, I woke before dawn. I made a fresh pot of strong black coffee and carried my favorite mug out to the porch. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I sat in my rocking chair, watching as the first pale light of dawn began to creep over the dark silhouette of the mountains. I looked down at my hands, cradling the warm mug. I traced the silvery raised line of the burned scar on my forearm, a permanent reminder of Operation Starlight. For years, I had seen these marks as ugly things, evidence of a life I had to hide, but now I saw them differently. They weren't symbols of damage. They were a map of my life. They were proof of the battles I had fought, the choices I had made, and the fact that I had survived. I no longer needed anyone else's approval to know my own worth. My value wasn't determined by a name on a plaque or a picture in a frame. It was forged in fire and shadow, and it was mine alone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, new morning air. I had created this dawn all by myself, and as the sun finally broke over the mountaintop, flooding the valley with golden light, a genuine, unforced smile spread across my face. I felt free. The sun climbed higher, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking back. I was only looking forward to where the light was waiting. My journey to find my own light has come to an end, but I know that for many of you listening, your own journeys are still unfolding. My story is a powerful reminder that our value is not defined by the family we were born into, but by the peace we build for ourselves. If my story resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button, and I would love to read your thoughts. So, please share one thing that gave you strength on your own path in the comments below. Your story could be the light someone else needs to see today. Finally, if you want to hear more stories of resilience and finding your voice, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.